All right, great. So welcome everyone to the first of our 2501 grant webinars. So this is first in a series of webinars, and this one we're going to focus on telling everyone more about DGA and what managed grazing on a dairy will look like. So the 2501 grant is really cool, and it is allowing us to translate all of our materials into Spanish and provide the whole apprenticeship program in Spanish. And this webinar will also be available. It'll be translated as well. And yeah, we have others coming up, so look out for those. And we have two speakers with us today. One is Angie, and she's our apprenticeship director. And the other is Altfried, and he is a grazing extraordinaire and an educational coordinator in Wisconsin. So I'll let both of them introduce themselves more. But yeah, this is part of the 2501 USDA grant. In addition to it allowing us to present everything in Spanish, it's also doing a lot for veteran outreach. So two really great, things that are allowing us to do more with DGA for Spanish speakers and veterans. So with that, Angie, I'll let you introduce yourself.
You bet. Hi, everybody. My name is Angie Sullivan, and I'm the apprenticeship director for the Dairy Grazing Apprenticeship. What that means is I just manage the day-to-day operations of the apprenticeship. We are in 15 states. We're a national organization, and we have education coordinators in those states. So I work closely with them. They are the boots on the ground folks working directly with the mentors and the apprentices. So we all work together just to ensure everything is running smoothly. And I also work with the Department of Labor under our federal registration to ensure that we have all of our paperwork in line and that we're always in compliance with their requirements. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about DGA, just how it got started, how the program works. And if you have any questions, if you want to hold those to the end, that would be great. After I'm completed with mine, Altfried will talk about basics of managed dairy grazing. And so you'll have time at the end to ask him questions also. You ready for me to get started, Ashley?
Yes, I'm going to pull up your PowerPoint. Okay.
Perfect. Okay. You can go to the next one, Ashley. So this is actually one of our former daughters of one of our former apprentices on that first slide. So that's always nice to see her face. So DGA, really the basic idea of dairy grazing apprenticeship, which was a brainchild of our executive director, Joe Tamandel, is just to provide a solid guided pathway for apprentices to become dairy farm business owners, to advance their grazing careers, and really overall big picture, just to strengthen the economic and environmental well-being of our rural communities through grazing. Go ahead, Ashley.
Sorry. Oh, thank you.
So we are the first in the nation of agricultural apprenticeship. There are more now. There are a few organic vegetable manager apprenticeships and some other agricultural apprenticeships. But we were started in 2010 just as a state registered apprenticeship in the state of Wisconsin. In 2013, through the assistance of a beginning farmer and rancher development grant, we were able to become our own independent nonprofit. And then a lot of interest started in other states across the nation. So in 2015, we became federally registered so that we could be a national program through the Department of Labor. What that means is that we have a set of standards. Our apprentices complete a 3,700 hour on-the-job work experience on one of our mentor dairy farms. They also complete 300 hours of related instruction. That includes classroom work, peer-to-peer networking, pasture walks, that type of thing, meetings with their education coordinators. And so that's all part of the bigger picture that they complete in order to become a journey worker in our program. And they do receive an actual journey worker certificate in managed grazing dairy, just like plumbers, electricians go through apprenticeships and become journey workers. Our apprentices have the same opportunity. Okay. Our Candidates, we currently have 143 candidates in our program. That means that these are folks who have come onto our website, read about our program, filled out an application, and would like to be placed on a farm. And again, they're all over in our 15 states and some outside of our 15 states. Some people apply even though we aren't officially in that state. If we get enough interest in those states, then we certainly start making efforts to expand the program. Go ahead, Ashley. Currently, we have 32 apprentices. You'll see by this slide that it's all different levels. It's different education levels. It's different demographics, different ages. There's a breakdown. It looks like this slide isn't completely coming through as it was supposed to, so it's a little hard to read. I apologize about that. You can see the breakdown in the different states, how many apprentices we have in each of those states. And we have graduated 57 apprentices onto journey workers at this point. Soon to be 59. We have two new ones happening at the next meeting. The basic guideline for our program for our apprentices is this training guideline, or we also call it a job book. It just it steps the apprentice through each of the skills that they need to acquire in order to graduate from the program. Through the 2 years, they work through this book with their mentor. This book is also connected to the 6 core classes that they take as part of our program. And this is also a way for our education coordinators to stay connected with the apprentice and the mentor, evaluate how they're doing as they move through the program. It just gives us a really good guideline to make sure that they're on track. Yeah, these slides are not coming through in this presentation mode. I apologize about that. The options that this gives, some of the opportunities that our program give to our journey workers is they can get into a partnership with their mentor that they are involved in. They can spin off into their own dairy farm, which we have had journey workers do. They can transition into ownership of the mentor farm that they are on. Many, as the slide says, the average age of the farmer, 59 years old. Many of them do not have succession plans. Maybe their children don't have interest in taking over the farm, and they're looking for someone to come in and manage that farm and take it over. So that is always an option, and that is worked out between the mentor and the apprentice themselves. After they've spent 2 years together on the farm, they know whether they feel like this is a good fit for that apprentice to take over. So that's what we would like to see, because we certainly want to see these people going on to their own farms. That's definitely a success for us. Many apprentice outcomes that are similar to the outcomes of the mentor. They make a lot of contacts and do a lot of networking through this program. They can earn equity by buying cattle as they're working through the apprenticeship. They can enter into partnerships. There's just many options that they have. Many times they just move into possibly a management level position at the farm that they're on, or move on to other areas in the dairy industry. This is just a quick map of where our mentors are located all over our states. As you can see, there are some outliers in states where we currently don't have the program. But again, we pay attention to the interest in those states. And if there's enough interest and we can find an administrative partner there, we certainly are willing to expand. We actually are currently expanding into the state of Oregon. I think maybe you have to go back one. Yeah, there we go. The mentor outcomes, they get highly skilled employees, which is it's a big benefit for them. As we know, the dairy industry, there are not a lot of people going into the dairy industry currently. So to find people who have experience or are well-trained, obviously if they've grown up on a family farm, that's helpful. So this really allows that mentor to train and create their own skilled, competent worker. Many of them, like I said, the apprentices move into management positions, which is very nice for the mentor. They can back off a little bit on the management of the farm and turn that over to the journey worker. And this also just helps them understand what's involved in owning and operating a dairy. That helps them realize whether this is something they want to do on their own or whether they would like to continue on a farm in a management position. As I mentioned in the beginning, the apprentices are required to do 300 hours of related instruction. We have our own online managed grazing innovation center. There are 6 core classes that our apprentices are required to take as part of that related instruction. All of those classes are online. And we also are in the process of adding a 200 level class so that if our apprentices come in, some of them come in with a dairy science degree already, they need a more advanced level class. So we are actually in the process of adding those as we speak. We have 2 great programs for our participants, incentive programs, and veterans have a lot of benefits through our Ag Vets grant. We are currently involved in the last year of our Ag Vets grant, but we also are a partner with the Farmer Veteran Coalition on another Ag Vets grant. It allows up to $7,500 in 3 separate payments to veterans who join our program. Their courses, their related instruction courses are reimbursed, and they receive cash for things like if they need to relocate to a farm, it helps them with moving costs or just general living costs. We also have a veteran liaison that works directly with our veterans if they have issues with paperwork or they need help filing paperwork. We work with the Wisconsin Department of Veteran Affairs and we get them the help they need. Also, Organic Valley has been an incredible supporter of our program. Obviously, they're Wisconsin based and we started as being Wisconsin based, but they offer a great incentive for their farmers. If an Organic Valley farmer hires an apprentice, Organic Valley will pay them training credits over the 2-year apprenticeship that equal about $8,000 over the 2 years. So that's a very nice incentive for those mentors. It helps them offset the cost of hiring that apprentice. And it's just it's a great way that Organic Valley supports us. These are our administrative partners. Like I said, we're in 15 states. We have several nonprofits and university extensions who partner with us and provide an education coordinator in those states. And without them and the education coordinators, we could not do what we do because, like I said, they offer the support and the boots on the ground resources in those states. So very appreciative of those organizations. All right, the next one is just a snapshot of our education coordinators and where they're located. These folks work tirelessly for DGA in addition to whatever their full-time job is. Most of them do the DGA work on a very part-time basis. So the work that they do for us is much appreciated as it's in addition to what they're doing on a regular daily basis. So it's great working with them. Our program really tries to build a community amongst the managed dairy grazing community. We try to provide a community feel for our apprentices so they feel like they're part of something bigger. We do that through monthly roundtables. We have a Facebook discussion group. All of our education coordinators host pasture walks during the grazing season. And we also offer support to our journey workers after they graduate. We have sections on our website where we offer opportunities for them, whether it's farm ownership, farm management positions, and make sure they get connected with those folks to try to find a connection. And that's my last slide. We always say skilled people are the key to this program. And so we are certainly proud of the fact that we can offer this program in this area of agriculture. And yeah, we look forward to expanding. So if you have any questions, please hold them to the end and I'm happy to answer. Also, there's my contact information. Feel free to contact me anytime outside of this webinar if you have additional questions. Thanks so much for your time.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Angie. So now I'll turn it over to Altfried, and he's going to talk about managed dairy grazing.
Thank you, Ashley, and Hello and welcome to everybody. Maybe a few words about my background. As you can tell by now, I'm born, raised, and educated in Germany. I immigrated to the United States in 1986. My wife and I, we managed, or we worked as a herdsman on a dairy farm for 5 years. And then for 26 years, we operated our own farm, Grazing Farms, 140 cow, seasonal pasture-based dairy farm. Since 2016, I retired from dairy farming, and since 2015, I'm working as an education coordinator for DGA here in Wisconsin. So with that, I'll share my screen. And today we want to talk about an introduction to managed dairy grazing. So this is some basic information about what is managed dairy grazing and how do we do it. Well, in their most basic form, it's where cows are really harvesting their own forage and spread their own manure. And we can control how much of the forage we offer to the cows, for how long, where they go. That's where the management portion comes in. And through the management, we're trying to optimize the amount of forage and the quantity and the quality of the forage that we offer to the cattle through the entire growing season. And why would we do this and not keep them in confinement? It is because it offers us a great opportunity to reduce our costs that are associated with harvesting forage and also spreading the manure. Everybody is keenly aware of how much the cost of fuel increased, and all these operations rely on fuel very heavily. But there's also machinery costs that go along with this, labor costs, and so on. Furthermore, it's a natural environment for the cow. Just think about how do you see cows pictured? You rarely see them standing on concrete, be it for advertisement for a dairy product, be it advertisement even for a dairy webinar that might deal with confinement issues. Most of the time you see a cow standing in grass. And the rumen of the cow, the cow is a ruminant, and it's really built for grazing fresh forage. By doing this, there are some health benefits that come along with grazing. Most graziers report much better herd health. With a higher forage diet, usually there are fewer metabolic issues. Hoof health is greatly improved. And most graziers report a longer lifespan of their cows than would be the case in confinement. Furthermore, perennial forages on the landscape are very beneficial to build soil health. They have often very deep root systems, especially if they are on the landscape for many years. They have deep root systems that can sequester carbon very deep into the soil profile. It helps avoiding erosion and thereby help with water quality. So there are great societal benefits that come with us grazing our cows. And another benefit that we are keenly aware of in DGA is that with the increase of on-farm profitability of smaller dairies, that money often translates into revitalized rural communities, because the profitable smaller dairy farm is much more likely to spend their dollars locally than a very large confinement dairy. But we do need a little bit of infrastructure to implement managed grazing. So first of all, of course, we need to have forage to graze. So if you have a farm that has a very small footprint, you really just own buildings and you buy in all your feed, obviously this is not going to work for you. But in terms of forage to graze, it's not like you have to seed down a specific species or a new pasture. It can be old hay fields, old pastures that have not been managed very well in the past. It can be even some annuals like corn or sorghum Sudan. But grazing cows only works with a good fence. So fence is definitely part of the infrastructure, and we differentiate there between perimeter fencing and internal subdivisions, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. We also need to move cattle back and forth to the facility. Most people milk twice a day. So twice a day, animals have to come to and from the barn. And it might not seem an essential part when it's dry, but certainly in wet conditions, you'll quickly find out that you need to have good lanes. Water, many people provide water and some do not, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. As far as fence options go, most graziers use nowadays high tensile wire for their perimeter fences, 3 to 5 strands. If you're on a very busy country road, maybe you want to have 4 to 5 strands. If you just build a perimeter to your neighboring fields, a 3-strand might be sufficient. Note that a legal fence doesn't necessarily need to be electrified if it has 4 wires or more, but it's definitely something that we do not recommend. We recommend that at least some of the strands are electrified. Here in the foreground, you see an example of a 4-wire perimeter fence at a busy county road here in Wisconsin. I mentioned woven wire only because some of you might graze different species besides dairy cows. Woven wire is really the best option if you are grazing goats and sheep. But it is a much more costly option than just straight high tensile wire. Now you might hear the term portable fencing, temporary fencing. It all refers to using a poly wire. It essentially looks, and we see some examples on some pictures, it essentially looks like a rope that has stainless steel or copper or aluminum wires woven into it that carry the electricity, but it handles just like a string. And that makes it very portable, easy to roll out, easy to roll up. And that's really the best form to use for daily moves of the cattle, or for building initially your subdivisions within the perimeter fence. After a year or two of grazing, you might find out the ideal paddock size, the ideal paddock layout. Then you might want to go and maybe put up 1-wire high tensile internally. But to start with, definitely poly wire is the way to go. Poly tape is mentioned because that's a better option for young cattle like calves or young heifers. And electronet, again, only mentioned if you have other species like sheep or poultry. They best fenced with electronet, which is like it almost looks like woven wire, but again, it's made from plastic rope. We use stepping posts that are easy to carry. They're either made of plastic or steel with plastic caps as insulators on it, and an array of different fencing reels. Here are some examples. You see this happens to be a Gallagher step-in post. I don't know whether you can see my mouse here. On the top, you see the poly wire running, and there are clips at different heights of the post for different classes of livestock. So they're very flexible to use for from calves all the way to adult cattle. Here you see a commercial fencing reel. Sometimes they're even geared. That means for each revolution of the handle, the drum turns 3 times. If you have long footage of fence to reel up, that might be a good way to go. However, they're pretty expensive. Here, the electric connection is made with alligator clips from a high tensile perimeter fence down to the poly wire. Here's another example, much cheaper, which is what I use most of the time. It's just an electric cord, an electric extension cord reel that you can buy for, well, it used to be $4. I'm sure now it's $10 at your local hardware store. But I put just the amount of wire on that I need for daily moves of the cattle. And then to tension it instead of a ratchet, I just wrap the wire a couple of times around the handle here. The electricity is provided through a gate handle at the far end, where it's hooked into a hot perimeter fence. But certainly you could use that same alligator clip and make a connection here from the perimeter to the poly wire. This is an example for poly tape that I mentioned earlier. It's nice for calves because it flickers a little bit in the wind, and it gives cattle that are not perfectly trained to fence a real visual clue of where the fence is located. Now, all these wires need to be energized, as I mentioned earlier. And we use for that a low impedance fencer, not a solid state one, which used to be popular many years ago. The size really depends on how much you want to electrify, whether you have more poly wire than steel fence wire, your acreage, how many fences internally, and so on. But as a general recommendation, up to 80 acres, you're probably okay with a 6-joule fencer. Then above that, it really depends. Anywhere from 10 to 30 joule, you can buy energizers today. Important is grounding. I walk on many farms that say my cattle don't stay in, and it's often related to insufficient grounding. Often I see just a rusty metal post sticking in the ground with casually wrapped around wire. That will not do the trick. So you need an 8 to 10 foot ground rod for every 2 joule of energizer, and they need to be spaced apart as about 8 to 10 feet apart, just the same as long as they are. And then you want to have a good clamp that clamps the wire to the grounding rod, and all metals should be the same, like the grounding rod, the wire, the clamps. So preferably all galvanized stainless steel. Galvanized steel. And the reason for that is otherwise, with different wires being mixed, you might get electrolysis and corrosion, and your grounding field will not work. So I cannot emphasize enough how important grounding is. I talked about lanes, and you do need lanes for dairy cattle. If you build gates for each paddock, make sure they're always located in, not just only in the corner of the paddock, but in the corner that's closest to the facilities you want the cattle to move to. Cattle really learn where their home is, so to speak, where their milking takes place. and you will always find that they congregate in the corner closest to the facilities. If you put your gate somewhere else, you will have a heck of a time trying to get the cows to move away from that direction that they want to go into. Many graziers do not build gates. They just raise wires wherever they want cattle to enter a paddock. They raise it up, be it either with 3 or 4 inch PVC posts, or some build more sophisticated so-called that are electrified, so cattle cannot push it over, but have an insulator at the bottom where they contact the ground. You do not need to build sophisticated lanes to start with. This is an example from my farm. In the beginning, I was not able to build improved lanes. I didn't have enough funds for this, but I quickly realized I had to do something that my lanes wouldn't turn to washboards in wet weather. So I split the lanes. You see a wire that splits this lane, and it splits at 1/3 and 2/3. And this side here, Ashley, can you see my mouse when I point with it? Thank you. This side, I call it the dry lane, and this side here, I call the wet lane. And if you really think about it, during the grazing season, most days are not wet. So what this does is when it rains and it's wet, I force the cow single file down this wet lane. And because this area doesn't get disturbed when it's wet, it very quickly dries, sometimes in a matter of 10, 12 hours after a 1-inch rainstorm. And then cattle can walk back on a very smooth surface. However, I should mention there's cost share available from NRCS, and years into my farming career, I was able to afford to build those. Even with cost share, it's a sizable investment, and you have to build them to NRCS standards if you get cost share. And this is an example of an improved lane that certainly makes moving cattle in wet conditions a lot easier. So water, there are different delivery systems out there. Hauling is certainly an option. Most people put a pipeline out. It could be either a pipeline that's gravity fed from a tank that gets filled maybe during the night when there's not a lot of other water demands on the system. A lot of systems are just directly connected to the water pump and the pressure tank. It all depends on the layout of your farm. Do you have to pump uphill or not, and so forth. Most installations are above ground when they're piped, but you have to remember to drain it in the winter time. Otherwise, you might get places where you have water leaks in the spring. With those pipe systems, most people use portable tanks. And even for a 100-cow dairy, a 100-gallon tank is sufficient if you have good flow coming to the tank. And that flow, you don't want that to be inhibited by the valves. So that's why I point out you need full flow valves. The reason you can get by with small tanks is we try to keep the tank close to the livestock, within 300 to 600 feet. Then instead of a whole herd movement, you have just individual animals going to water. I say dairy at facilities only, maybe. Lots of graziers went away from supplying water in the paddocks because, you know, it is a little extra work to move those tanks around. You might get the occasional tank that tips over. So a lot of graziers bring their animals home anyways during the heat of the day. Let's say they turn them out after milking, they graze for 3 hours or so. And then at 11, 12 o'clock, they bring them home to the facilities where they provide shade, water, maybe some stored feed. And then after the evening milking, they go out and graze again. There's not a lot of water intake that takes place during the night. And the animals learn to really tank up, so to speak, at the facilities. Now, then you don't get by with a 100-gallon tank. Then you need a lot of capacity because a lot of animals want to drink at the same time. Here are some examples. So this is a 50-gallon tank here with a lead hose. Here's a 25-gallon tank for calves, also connected with a lead hose to an above ground water line that's connected, and the lead hose is connected to the water line with a quick coupler. This is very common. The company is called Plazone, and very convenient way of plugging in water. You push this male connector in and water flows. You unplug it, water flow stops. So a little bit about stocking rate and stocking density. So how many cattle can you graze on your property? That's of course one of the first questions that always gets asked. Or how many acres do you need to graze your cows? Well, it really depends on what your goals are and what your resources are. Do you want to provide all forage from pasture, or do you just want to provide a portion of the ration that the cow consumes from pasture? So all that impacts stocking rate. Also, the potential forage production of the particular soils you're dealing with and what their water holding capacity is. But then management comes into the equation because it depends how often are you willing to move fence. So most dairy producers provide fresh pasture at least once a day, if not twice or more times a day. And with that fencing technology that I pointed out earlier, that's very easy to achieve. And it takes literally minutes to give cows a fresh break of pasture. So in terms of management, what can we control? It's the residual that we leave behind in the paddock, the rest period between grazings, and the turn-in height. So that's all up to us, how we manage that. And we'll talk a little bit about the importance of the residual through slides that I got courtesy from Jim Garish, who wrote a book on management intensive grazing. It's a small book that really clearly lays out in distinct chapters how managed grazing works. And the first point he makes is that only green growing leaves carry out photosynthesis. So you basically have to look at our paddocks as a giant solar panel. So he differentiates 3 phases of growth. Phase 1 is when grass just comes out of dormancy, or those would be pastures that are grazed very, very short, where there is not enough leaf matter for plants to carry out photosynthesis. In those cases, plants grow from their reserves, and that's what we try to avoid during the grazing season. Phase 2 is the vegetative stage, and that's usually anywhere between 3 and 12 to 14 inches for cool season grasses. And phase 3 is when the plant switches from vegetative growth to making seed heads and goes into the generative phase. So as mentioned, that phase 2 is for most of the species that we work with, which are cool season grasses and legumes, somewhere between 4 and 12 to 14 inches in height. So we really want to avoid grazing down to to this phase 1, where plants cannot photosynthesize, which you see on the right side of this slide. Because with shorter residuals, you really slow down the recovery of your pastures. And not only that, but if you graze repeatedly slow, which this is a very old picture in an old textbook, you see that repeatedly cut or grazed low, the roots are much less developed. And with that, with less root development and depth of the roots, the plants cannot really reach water nutrients as well. So you have to remember, whatever you do to the top of the plant affects what happens beneath the soil surface. So with that lower residual, it extends the number of days that is required for the paddock to recover back to the 12 to 14 inches. So our rest periods greatly extend. And often people ask, am I not wasting grass if I leave residual? Where here it's a simple illustration. The actual numbers might be different for your particular farm, again, depending on soils and climate. But if you watch not to graze below phase 2, and it takes 30 days to get back to your 12 to 14 inches, you have 6 harvests of maybe 1,000 pounds during a grazing season. So what happens if we fear that we're wasting feed? Shall we move them or not? What happens is we graze them lower if we fear we're wasting feed. Now the rest period extends to 45 days. Now we have just 4 harvests or 4 grazings in a 180-day grazing season. Yeah, we get more forage with each grazing, but the total yield for the paddock is lower than in the other example, 4,800 pounds versus 6,000 pounds. And that's really when people complain they don't get the same amount of production from their pastures as from the hay fields, usually the reason is that they graze too low and don't leave enough residual or leave the animals too long in a paddock before moving them. There's also another effect that's with really short grazed pastures, we expose a lot of soil surface. And here in this study from the University of Nebraska, you see the different percentages of ground cover, 95, 75, and just 50%. And you see the percent of a 3-inch rainfall that runs off. There's very little runoff with really good pasture and 0 soil erosion, whereas with just 50% ground cover, you see that quite a bit of soil erodes away. And the intake is also affected by availability. So as more forage you provide, a dense stand that's 12 to 14 inches tall, as more intake you get. There's also quality plays a role. You get more intake with quality, but primarily you need a really good stand of pasture. So this series of slides really wants to emphasize the importance of residual. And I mentioned stocking density earlier, just a word about it because it gets often mixed up with stocking rate on your farm. Stocking rate is the animals that you have on your whole farm, on your total acreage, the carrying capacity of your farm. Stocking density is how many animals you put on a given piece of pasture at one time. So that can be very, very high. I sometimes grazed 140 cows on just a quarter acre, depending on what I was grazing. For example, when I was grazing sorghum Sudan that was like four feet tall, you really want to put a lot of animals on a very small piece to get good pasture utilization. So as higher the stocking density, as better is your usually your pasture utilization. And you know, if this all sounds very scientific, but there is an art to that most dairymen are familiar with. It means watching your animals. Watch the rumen fill on your animals. Do they come running to the barn and are eager to get some supplemental feed, or are they hardly moving when you open the gate from your paddock to try to bring them home? That all tells you whether or not you provided enough pasture to the cows. So what are some common pitfalls for people that are start out? Here's the residual again. That's the most common mistake that I see out there. But then there's also the phenomenon where the pasture is too short at turn-in. So let's say everybody takes the advice to heart. They start grazing, they turn cows in when it's 12 to 14 inches tall. And they go through their rotation. They have maybe 20 or 30 paddocks, but it stops raining. So the next time they come around after 30 days, the pasture is not 10 inches, not 12 inches, it's just 10 inches. Then another 30 days later, it might just be 8 inches. So that is a problem that I see where people don't adjust the rest period with what the climate conditions are in a particular grazing season. And with that, the rest periods are sometimes not long enough. And you have to anticipate that. You have to figure out what is your grass growth rate. And that's often done by walking your pastures on a weekly or bi-weekly basis to really watch what's going on out there. And DGA is working with the University of Missouri on a system, it's called Paddock Track, that helps you to do that very efficiently and quickly with the help of an ATV. So how can we avoid another shattered dream and that hopefully you don't find the toilet at the end of the rainbow, but the pot of gold? It's by putting it all together in a grazing plan. And there's a network of grazing specialists, either through NRCS or your local land conservation agencies, that can help you incorporate your goals that you have for your farm and match them to the needs of the livestock that you have on your farm and with any other resources. And they can help you lay out a paddock plan, make management recommendations. And I should mention, if you would like any cost share, potential cost share from NRCS, be it for fencing, for seeding, for water lines, for lanes, prescribed grazing plan is the first step to get. So, and with that, do I have enough time, Ashley, to share a few pictures of my farm through the seasons?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, so Cruising Grass Farms was the name of our farm. And we, as mentioned, we were seasonal, spring calving only, 140 cows, 400 acres, of which 220 were managed pastures. You see a picture of our facilities. There's an aerial picture. What's nice on this aerial picture is you see the different stages of regrowth on the different paddocks. Now you might criticize that this doesn't look very green up here. It is this picture was taken in the summer of 2012 when we had a terrible drought here in most of Wisconsin. We were a proud owner member of Organic Valley. We shipped our milk to. I would like to say that's what we look like today, but that was many years ago. All our children are adults and out of the house. The last 10 years of our farming career, we had a share milking system on our farm. So these would be young people that back then DGA didn't exist yet, unfortunately, but these would be people today that have already 2 years of dairy experience and now want to earn equity and build a herd of cattle. And these people were able to do that on our farm. This happens to be our first share milking couple. So let's start with the winter. In the winter, all our young stock and dry cows are wintered outside. They were fed right in the paddock with baleage and or dry hay. And that was done with the help of the bale processor. Once a day, the animals were brought back to the facilities to get free-flowing water. I should mention that here is where we had stock tanks and supplied free-flowing water and some minerals. I should mention that in some areas of the country, northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, some producers rely on snow to water their cattle in the wintertime. Now I found water is such a cheap nutrient, and just if you ever went winter camping and you know what it takes to boil a pot of tea from snow, you know how much snow it takes and how much energy it takes to get that snow melted. So I feel the same for the cattle. That's a cheap way to save energy on the cattle, to provide them with free-flowing water. The milking herd was housed in a 3-sided shed with fence line feeding, and again they got baleage and a dry hay that simply substituted for pasture in the summer. We milked in a retrofit 16-unit swingover parlor that made milking a lot easier than shifting cows in a 40-stall stanchion barn, which we had done for 3 years prior. Spring comes around, and I had permanent paddocks that are never plowed up, but I frost seeded usually a few pounds of red clover and a little bit of ladino clover on every acre every year, because legumes are so important to increase the quality of the sward for the cattle, but also to fix nitrogen and bring nitrogen into an organic farming system. Spring, March was also the time our calves were born, and one advantage of seasonality is, you know, all your management happens in blocks, so all the calves come at the same time. Very labor-intensive period on the farm, but then it's out of the way and done for the rest of the year. They move then after 6 to 8 weeks, they move out to the pasture. Here it's a little training paddock where they get trained to the fence, and they also get trained to this mobile milk feeder that later on we use when they are out in their pasture rotation. In addition to pasture, calves in the first year get free choice dry hay to help with the rumen development, and they under a shade mobile with here in the back you see a little mineral feeder that's on there too. And that we move around also with a UTV or ATV. Here you see the fencing. I pointed out the earlier in the presentation, I pointed out the 1/2-inch poly tape. That's what we use for our calves. Spring is also the time we we transitioned the milking herd to pasture, and that's a very gradual transition because you don't want to upset the rumen and switch just from one day from stored feed to the next day to pasture. So there's very little dry matter the cows are getting, but we call this flash grazing. And what it does, it helps us stagger the different paddock, the growth in the different paddocks, so pasture doesn't all come on at the same time. Spring is a beautiful time on the, this is later on in May, and now the cows are on full forage from pasture. Beautiful time on any grazing farm. And here happens to be a new seeding of meadow fescue and alfalfa. Yeah, spring puts a smile on every grazier's face. Here you see a unique clover. It's Kura clover. It looks very similar to red clover, but has more pinkish blossoms. But most importantly, the stem doesn't have hairs on it like red clover. That's how you can differentiate it. And it's the only clover that's rhizomatous. So once you get it, you have it forever. You got to make sure that you don't get patches like this where there's very little grass, because it tends to bloat cattle easily. You want it intimately intertwined with grass, and the only grass that can very well compete with it is really quackgrass or wheat canary grass. So cows are then on their daily rotation. We move fence 3 times a day. They got fresh paddock after each milking and another one midday. And you see it's always just a single wire poly fence that the cows are very well used to. And the only time they get out is through human error. Somebody leaves a gate open, somebody forgets to hook up a fence. We had a shade paddock that we reserved for the hottest days of the year to provide the cows shade. And then our young stock was on their own rotation. Sometimes a leader follower, when that residual was a little bit too much, we didn't get it quite right. We wanted to bring it down a little bit to those 3 to 4 inches. We follow with young stock, otherwise they were on their own rotation. Summer also the time to make stored feed, either from excess pasture. We had more pasture than we needed in the spring, so we can make hay. Then as the season progresses and the rest periods are getting longer, either due to lack of rain or cloudy skies, then we can bring more acres into the pasture rotation. But we also had hay acreage off the main grazing platform. We made usually round bale silage either with individual bales or inline bales. This was our composting system. So the bedded pack barn that the cows left in the spring after winter, we brought in usually 10 sows, and they rooted this up by us making holes into the bedded pack, and then we poured grain down the holes and moved this wire just a couple feet every day. And soon those sows went to work and started digging for the grain. And in the fall, if we were lucky enough to get enough rainfall, we were able to stockpile some pastures for grazing after the growing season came to an end in late fall or early winter. And usually we stretched our grazing out by providing some additional feed. In addition to pasture, we provided some supplemental feed right out in the paddock. But it still makes things easier. The cows are spreading the manure themselves. Yeah, we have to feed them, but we don't have to bed them yet. We don't have to scrape the yards. We don't have to all manure. We also had a dairy steer enterprise that was on a separate grazing platform, and they grazed usually deep into the fall and were harvested October through December. And then fall is the time when we have the least amount of work, and that's when we usually took turns to go on vacation. And for me, that often meant going on a motorcycle trip. I just want to mention some resources. Networking is always the greatest form how people learn. If you have access to pasture walks or local grazing networks, That's a great way to learn from other people. We have an organization in Wisconsin, grassworks.org. They organize our grazing conference, and there are similar organizations in other states. A couple publications, Graze is a great publication. Stockman Grass Farmer, maybe a little bit more geared towards southern climates. You at various grazing or organic conferences, you can learn usually a lot about managed grazing. There is the biggest organic conference is usually in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And Angie mentioned earlier already what we call just simply MAGIC, our Managed Grazing Innovation Center, where regardless of whether you are part of DGA or not, you can enroll in any courses related to managed grazing. And I mentioned already the book, it's called Management Intensive Grazing by Jim Garage. For any newcomer to grazing, a great way to learn about the principles. Understanding Ag also has a lot of webinars related to grazing, an organization that really tries to push regenerative practices in agriculture. And with that, I say go out and graze on, but do good to land, animals, and humankind in the process. And I thank you all for your attention. And if Ashley allows, we can put our heads together and maybe answer some questions you might have.
I love that, Alfred. That was really great. And I am excited to see your farm. I've never gotten to do the picture tour, so that was a great addition. Thank you.
All right, let me stop the screen share.
So we will record this and share it. But so I know a lot of people will see this, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Camilla, but yeah, any questions or anything we can clarify or?
Yeah, that was great. And I love the farm pictures. I have a question about grazing, just because I've been hearing some people here in New York saying this year because it's so dry, and some people are, worried that their grass is not coming as good as other years. And, everyone worried that this is going to be worse with the years. So have you seen any type of irrigation system or some type of farm that use any type of, water system to avoid these climate change problems? Or do you think this is not necessary? What do you think about irrigated grazing systems?
Shall I take this?
Yep, that's you, Alfred.
Yeah.
Yeah, so even in a climate like Wisconsin, we get roughly 33 inches per year on average. I think an irrigation system, depending on how much pasture you really want to provide. Let's say our case, 140 cows, we were shooting for at least 30 to 35 pounds of dry matter from pasture during the grazing season. So we heavily relied on pasture. Even in our climate, an irrigation system would quickly pay for itself. It looks like a huge investment to start, but trust me, Camilla, I even would have put a center pivot on my farm.
Yeah.
But the problem was, and I had irrigation folks come out, they have a sophisticated software that shows them all the DNR wells in the area, and they can tell you whether or not you have enough water. Irrigation takes a lot of water. People that are not familiar with irrigation really underestimate that. To put 1 inch on 1 acre is 27,500 gallons. So now you multiply that by the number of acres you want to irrigate, and if you're in a drought situation, you might not get rain for 3 or 4 weeks at a time. Ideally, for top growth, for the best growth possible, you want ideally 1 inch of rain every week, Saturday night, so it doesn't interfere with our activities, right? That's a lot of water. And so like a center pivot takes, from 500 gallons upwards of flow per minute. And not everybody has that. What you see often in grazing systems are K-line systems. So these are these little pods that are dragged around with a four-wheeler, and they need only a minimum of 50 gallons per minute. So if you have somewhat limited water supply, that might be an option for many. But be warned, irrigating is a lot of labor. It adds a lot of labor to if it's a dairy farm that's already stretched for labor, that might not be an option either. Short of irrigating in drought situations, you have to try to extend the rest period as much as you can. Maybe sometimes you have a dedicated hay field. Instead of cutting hay, you put a fence around it, a temporary fence, and turn animals in, or start supplementing. The important thing is to supplement early before you attempted to graze your pastures too short, because even if you get rain, they will not come back quickly otherwise.
Okay. And do you use or, recommend anyone to use any type of tool to measure how, your availability of pasture? Like, I know back home, I'm from Brazil, and in some systems back home, we, people use the stick or get these squares to kind of measure it, and
right,
just to know your inventory, to know because sometimes I feel like you have overgrazing, some areas in the paddock, not the whole area, but how do you know you are passing, this ideal height if maybe your cows are not evenly grazing, I guess.
Yeah, so not evenly grazing is usually related to stocking density. If you give them too big an area at one time, the cows can pick and choose what they want to eat. So that's why I said give them a small area, but maybe more often. So that helps with the uniformity. In terms of knowing what's out there, yeah, the beginning grazier should really calibrate their eyes to how much pasture they need to offer. And you mentioned a grazing stick that's often available at your local NRCS department. Organic Valley has them. A lot of grazing organizations hand them out at conferences and such. Next step up would be a rising plate meter, and you get, which with each step you get a little bit more sophisticated and get your estimation a little closer to what's really out there. But I mentioned that University of Missouri developed a system, it's called Paddock Track, that gets mounted to a four-wheeler or UTV. And through sonar, it can measure the paddock dry matter as you drive over a paddock. And DGA is currently in the process on putting that out on 8 different farms. And we're also publishing the results of it. And we're hoping that might be a system that might be more accessible to producers in the future and help them estimate what's really out there.
Awesome. Thank you for the answers.
Okay, I guess any questions for Angie before we wrap up? I know you guys are going to meet in the future too.
Yes.
Yep. We'll talk about our details tomorrow. Perfect.
Great. Well, thank you all. And I guess I'll hit end for this, and I will talk to you soon. And this will be available on the website and also translated into Spanish.
Perfect.
All right.
Thanks,
Have a great day.
Good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.